Hey guys, what's up? I got two questions from people that are pretty related, and I think I can answer both of them in the same video. The first one is, when would I start buying things like One Piece, Sorcery, Lorcana, MetaZoo, Weiss, Grand Archive, Star Wars Unlimited, all these other games? And the other question is, specifically, what do I think about Star Wars Unlimited, and is it investable? And I'll go back to something I wrote in November in my patron newsletter at the time. I made a post about specifically Sorcery, Lorcana, MetaZoo, One Piece, and also Weiss. Even though Weiss is a quote unquote established game, it faces its own challenges in terms of investability and basically longevity. And since I wrote that, of course, MetaZoo has folded. And now it's kind of been replaced in the popular discussion and the more speculative side of TCG investing with Star Wars Unlimited and to a lesser extent Grand Archive. And I think a lot of the points that I've made in the past about all those other games really apply well to Star Wars Unlimited and Grand Archive. There's some specific things with both. So the first is games based on IPs. It's kind of problematic because you have to ask yourself, are the people who run these games motivated by making a good game that will stand the test of time, that is managed well, that has good print runs, that has an intelligent meta, that has good pro play, worldwide championships, and really has a long-term future ahead of it? Or are these people motivated by cashing in on an IP? And of course, we know with things like Disney, well, Disney's probably in the long term motivated on cashing in on an IP. Now, can they create a game that will last for 5 years? Yeah, sure. Of course they can. Can Star Wars Unlimited be a game that lasts for 5 years? Of course. Can One Piece be a game that will last for years? Yeah, it's already, 3 years in? Something like that. So you can have these games go on for quite a while, and especially with things like Disney and One Piece, there's tons of existing lore that they can cram into expansions of the game into the future for a long, long time. And with Star Wars to a great extent too. Star Wars kind of suffers its own particular problem in that pretty much everything Disney that is Star Wars, people are starting to really sour on. And, it's bad to the point that people are kind of retconning and gaslighting themselves into thinking that the prequel trilogy was good. I mean, relative to Disney Star Wars, it was good, but relative to the original trilogy and just standing on its own, it was really bad. And so you end up with a situation where, yeah, could Star Wars Unlimited be completely based on the original trilogy? Okay, sure, it could be. It's unlikely, and they would run out of IP pretty fast. They'd run out of lore. They'd have to bring back the extended universe that they've said is not real. So you kind of end up with these problems when a game is based on an existing IP, it's based on a movie, it's based on an anime. It just kind of puts a cap on the longevity, and it calls into question the motivations of the people running it. On the far opposite end of that spectrum is something like Flesh and Blood. And of course, I will come back to Flesh and Blood again and again and again on this topic because they are essentially the exact opposite of a lot of these kind of, and I hate to use this word, but upstart games, these kind of fly-by-night recent games that have come out in the last couple of years. Because when James White was developing Flesh and Blood, he spent many years refining it. He had been a professional Magic player. He had been involved in distribution of Yu-Gi-Oh! And other games in his region. And so he had the business knowledge. He had the understanding of how to make a game. He had the understanding of how do you manage meta? How do you manage introducing a game, slowly introducing mechanics so that players can grasp it and you can roll out the full vision of the complicated game over time. He understood how to do those things, and he implemented them because he and his team, of course, because they wanted to build something that would stand the test of time. And it was not a stonk bro, let's throw out a MetaZoo, let's print a bunch of 101s, let's do Rudy tie-in cards, let's do all these things. Maybe that's a bad example because Flesh and Blood does have Rudy tie-in cards. But it was not the main focus like MetaZoo was. MetaZoo from the very beginning was, hey, it's 2021, let's roll out a product, let's do these one-on-ones and all these other things, and let's get the investors in here and let's prop it up. And the game just wasn't fun. People really didn't play it much. There was no good, strong, consistent, organized, worldwide, high-level professional play. There was one large event, I believe in Dallas. It was like a $200,000 championship, and that was about it. And, you know, that's one of the things you have to bring long term. If you want to get me excited in games like One Piece, Grand Archive, Sorcery, Lorcana, as an investable thing, you have to show that kind of stuff consistently. You have to show that the team can manage the meta. Because going all the way back to TCG network theory, you have to have a strong network in the long run. You have to be able to have people who want to open sealed boxes in the future. That's what will support the price of those boxes you stick back in your closet. That's what will cause them to appreciate, is that there will be people in the future who want to open those boxes, either out of nostalgia, out of arbitrage, out of using them just for fun to play with their friends on a Saturday night, hoarding them themselves because they want the sealed box. But if nobody needs the singles, if nobody wants to open the boxes, then ultimately there is no investment case for them. And that was the problem with MetaZoo. It's, I fear, the problem with Grand Archive, with all of these other games, especially with Weiss. Weiss, it's really bad. Nobody plays Weiss. If you go looking out on YouTube, it is nearly impossible to find a gameplay video of Weiss. But if you look at something, again, on the far opposite end of the spectrum, you'll have Flesh and Blood. There are tons of play videos on Flesh and Blood out there, and even more for Magic. When you go looking for play videos of Magic, you can drill down to things like pre-modern Goblins decks. And you will be overwhelmed with more pre-modern Goblin deck play videos than you could ever watch in your lifetime. But when you looked out for things like MetaZoo, when you look out for One Piece, you just don't find a lot. And Sorcery is a little better, so it's a little hopeful there. Star Wars Unlimited, I'm actually seeing a surprising amount of play videos for that. But all in all, you've got to have this organic popularity through YouTube. That helps a lot. That shows that people are actually playing the game, which means they're actually working on a meta. And you can't really have a strong design team that's going to nurture a meta if you don't also have players who then try to solve it and evolve it along with them. So you need all of that. You need the robust competitive play. You need publicly visible developers. You need guys like James White and Mark Rosewater out there talking with the community, explaining, why do we do these things? Can anybody name the head developer of Lorcana? I know you can go Google him because I did actually go search. He was involved in that lawsuit with Topps right before Lorcana released. But does anybody just know his name offhand? Has anybody ever seen him on film? If you don't have a publicly available development team, it's going to be a lot harder to convince people that you're serious about things if there's no interaction with the community. And this goes right along with having world level competition. And so you need all of those things working together to create that kind of network value theory culmination that will eventually allow you to realize gains on those boxes you're throwing into your closet. And without that, it's simply very speculative. It might work out. It may turn out that Bandai reverses its history of ruining every game it manages, and One Piece is the exception, and they manage to do everything great, and they create world-level competition that pro players want to migrate to away from other games, and it stands the test of time, and all those boxes that you're putting away of One Piece are worthwhile in the future. It might. Odds are it won't. Most games fail. And odds are Lorcana will be around for a couple years, and eventually Disney will decide, this just doesn't yield enough return on investment, and they'll fold it. Odds are Star Wars Unlimited will be around for a couple years, and Disney will make the same decision on that, and it'll fold. And when a game folds, its network collapses, and the value of the boxes in the future falls a lot. No, they don't go to zero. Very few assets ever go to zero, but the ability for them to appreciate is greatly stunted going forward. And so, I look at things like sorcery. I think sorcery is interesting. I think it has a chance. Now, it's still going to have to navigate expertly, but it has a chance. It's not based on an existing IP. It's not run by companies who have a history of screwing up TCGs. It's maybe got a chance. We'll have to wait and see. Things like Grand Archive, I have no faith in that. Sorry. When the very first Kickstarter release of Grand Archive, immediately, like sentence number 2, starts talking about how they're trying to build a game with extreme collectivity. Well, that's just stonk bro talk, the same way MetaZoo was doing. And we saw how that worked out. So I don't have any faith in Grand Archive at this point. Lorcana, no, it's print to demand. Star Wars Unlimited looks like it's print to demand. So, that hurts its collectability long term anyway. And the other real question you have to ask yourself about this is when you can go and buy Pokemon boxes. Just a couple of days ago on the bonus buck sale, you could buy Pokemon boxes, high 70s through the mid 90s for Scarlet and Violet era. And all of history tells us that on the long timeline, those will appreciate at 20, 30, 40% CAGRs. And you're going to go speculate money on an unproven game when you could just buy more Pokemon? Why? Why would you do that? The reason that I buy so much of the early Flesh and Blood is I think that it's in a sweet spot where the game is growing, and if it continues to grow the way that it has historically, those early Flesh and Blood boxes could meet or exceed some of those Pokemon boxes. And so I think they're in a sweet spot there. But long term, going forward, Flesh and Blood will plateau in its player size, and Legend Story Studios will figure out, more or less, the size of the print runs that are required, and things will even out, and the returns will be kind of normal. We'll figure out what the kind of normal returns for Flesh and Blood are. If they're 15, 18, 20%, probably around in there is where the average for a regular Flesh and Blood box will settle in the long term. But those early ones, I think, have a lot more potential because they were printed in a time when the game was much smaller and the game is growing. So why would you go out for something like Lorcana that's print to demand, Star Wars Unlimited that's print to demand, for One Piece that's based on an existing IP and is run by a game with a history of screwing up TCGs? Why go out and risk money in those when you have proven winners that you can spend money on? And yeah, maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you'll buy, Opus 9 or whatever they're up to. It doesn't matter. And you'll 100x your money. Maybe. But the odds are much greater that you'll pick 1 or 2 or 4 of these games we've been talking about on this video, and they'll all eventually fold, and you'll lose most or significantly all of your money. Why? So that's the real question, is why take those kind of risks for a moonshot lottery ticket payoff that you almost certainly won't get? And what's really hard for people to understand is most TCGs fail. And it's hard to keep that in mind because when we look out there today, we look at One Piece, Lorcana, Star Wars, Grand Archive, Sorcery, and we have all these new games out there. And, there's hype around them all. There's chatter around them all. TCG player supports most of them. And we think, oh yeah, these are real games. They're here. And it's hard to see all the dead TCGs from the last 30 years. There's hundreds, literally hundreds of them, that at one time were real games. They were sold in card stores. People occasionally played them. In the era of YouTube and beyond, from 2007 forward, people made videos about some of them occasionally, and they still died. MetaZoo just died. I mean, we just had this conversation with my patron newsletter in November, and since then, we've struck MetaZoo off the list because it's dead, and we've replaced it now with the hype of Star Wars Unlimited, and to a smaller extent, some increasing hype in Grand Archive. And most of them will fail. or most of them will just naturally fold after the company who owns the underlying IP has let it run its course and has decided they just want to move on to spending their capital on something else because the returns on the game will fall off over time. So right now, I really don't see myself going into any of these new card games. Definitely not Lorcana, not Star Wars Unlimited, not Grand Archive, not One Piece. Sorry, I know that'll disappoint some people. And maybe Sorcery. Maybe Sorcery. Maybe. But here's the other thing. It's okay to miss out. It's okay to look back and say, man, those boxes went 100x. I should have bought them. Because the reality is, you would not have had to have just bought those boxes. You would have had to have bought all the other boxes that were out there on the menu available to buy from all the speculative games and all their expansions at the same time. So you would not have just bought Welcome to Wraith Alpha and 100x'd your money. You would have had to have bought all the other speculative games that were around in the same time period, late 2019. And so, yeah, same thing with One Piece. You know, some of those early One Piece boxes are done very well, but there was a whole other sea of crappy card games, some of which have already folded, and many of which had multiple expansions. You would have had to have picked that winner to get that, 5, 6, 8x One Piece box. And you probably would not have done it. And in the future, you probably won't do it either. So don't get too greedy. Don't throw your money away. Don't speculate too much. But Sorcery looks like it could be interesting if the people running it can shepherd it through the next couple of years. And it's okay to miss out on the early times. We always have Pokemon. We always have 20, 25, 35, 40% compound annual growth rates from Pokemon. Don't get too greedy and miss out on that. Let me know what you think, guys. I had a couple people asking about this kind of thing, and I think it's important to stay grounded in the reasonable kind of assets that you can get into at good prices. Don't get too greedy out there. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my patrons who very, very generously support me every month. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you all. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade.